Welcome, everybody, to the second hour of Mindshifters Radio. Today is Wednesday, October the 25th, 2023, and our call-in number is 563-999-3581, and press 1, and that puts you into queue to talk to us. And we love to hear your comments and questions because that makes this your show. And we will be continuing with the topic that we've been doing, Michael reading the article by Robert Sapolsky saying that we do not have free will, and that has been going awesome, and we appreciate all the input and the people that are participating and adding to that conversation. And so we will be continuing that today. However, when Michael gets on, we did get a really good question through the app, and so we want to address that first. And so I'll give him just a moment to get dialed in, and then I'll read that question. Hope everybody's having a good day. This is the middle of the week. Today, tomorrow, Friday. It is going by so quickly. And Michael's dialing in now, and so hold just one moment. And we appreciate you all participating and being here with us. And so, Michael, do you want to start with the question that we got through the app?
Please, let's go for it, sweetie.
Okay. This young lady says, "Thank you, Michael, for the gift that you are giving to us. Much of it resonates with me so deeply, and yet it's a process I have to actively keep doing. So when I first started, I started just listing a bunch of stuff, and immediately that afternoon I felt like I had sea legs, and I became very sick for 3 days. Just continuous sneezing, and my body felt feverish. I felt like it was the toxicity/negativity working its way out. Can you confirm that someone can feel sick if we overdo the release or do too many, I'm assuming she means worksheets at once? Also, when you say we're not forgiving the other person, and yet this process is called the forgiveness process, who or what exactly are we forgiving? Thanks."
All right, good questions. So my first thought will be on your last thought, and that is never, ever, ever, ever forgive anyone for anything, because you can't. The whole idea of forgiving someone, letting someone else off the hook for what's happening inside of you, is a Greek aberration of forgiveness. What happened is the Greeks substituted pardoning for forgiveness. So when 99.9999% of the world says forgive, they're talking about, I have pain inside of me, that's all your fault, but it's okay, I'll forgive you. I'll let you off the hook for that. So I'm saying, please, never do that. What we want to do is to reestablish the actual meaning of forgiveness to the world, because we're caught in a fraud. You know, the man who's probably responsible for more deaths in history than any human being in history, Vladimir Lenin, wrote, "If you want to destroy a culture, change the meaning of its words." Virtually every true principle behind human life, in our Western languages especially, has been degraded to its opposite. It's backward, it's inside out, it's upside down. So forgiveness, as the world understands it today, is backward, inside out, upside down. Don't do it. Now, if someone has done something, let's say really terrible, awful, nasty, wicked, criminal, I might choose to be big about it and say, I'm going to let you off the hook for that. I'm going to pardon you. And pardoning can be very appropriate, especially because it tends to or helps to break the link in your mind between that person and the pain that you've projected into your brain's image of them. So pardoning can be helpful. But that's not forgiveness. If you call it forgiveness, then you'll think when you've let somebody off the hook, you've finished, and there's all that pain still left inside that you were talking about detoxing, because what I hear you describing when you began this work is a major healing crisis. You might want to listen to the links. In fact, I have your phone number. I'll text you a link or a series of links to a whole story on the healing process and what healing looks like. So once you've pardoned, you've let somebody off the hook, then do your forgiveness work. Then you go inside yourself and go, oh, what is it that horrible, terrible, nasty person, quote unquote, who maybe is a fully realized spiritual being who just came to help me and show me what I needed to deal with, what is it that person has shown me about myself? What is it that when they do what they do, my body responds with pain, suffering, disease, hatred, fear, rage, guilt? What is inside of me that I need to remove? Now I apply forgiveness to the content of my own mind, my own emotional nature, my physiology, and my genes. So we're redefining forgiveness here. Forgiveness is a tool with which you collapse the projections of your own perceptual mind onto others, and you get to directly access what's going on inside of yourself. And so that's our redefinition, or pardon me, we're going back to the original Aramaic definition. You go back to Yeshua, and in all the places where we hear the Greeks translating the words, where Yeshua says, forgive them for they know not what they do, forgive your brother, that's not an accurate translation. In between those two ideas, forgive and your brother, there are always two words that the Greeks don't translate, and the two words are as to. So in Aramaic, you'd hear, forgive as to your brother. Our English equivalent would be, your brother has brought up something painful in you, so forgive as to what your brother has brought up in you. So apply forgiveness to what's going on inside of you to free yourself from that dynamic. So that's what forgiveness is actually about. So you're never forgiving anyone. Again, never forgive anybody for anything, but forgive continuously. Apply forgiveness to the constructs of your mind that are reflections of your own dissociated pain and free yourself from it. Now, when you step into that, and you'll remember in step 2 in the worksheet, I'm willing to go through the physical, mental, and emotional symptoms of healing. So once I start to step in, people who live a life of denial, dissociation, projection, junk food, alcohol, drugs, caffeine, nicotine, sugar, pot, whatever it is, people who live in that world live in a world where they're using tools with which to help them to dissociate from the content of their own minds. That is, locks those energies down into tissue. If I put an energy into my, when you think of your body, mind, you as an energy system, relative to it, there are basically two qualities of energy. There's that which builds it up and strengthens it. There's that which tears it down. Tear down energy in the ancient Aramaic was called sin. It's actually an archery term. If you go back to the archery range and you're firing your arrow at the bullseye and you miss the bullseye, the scorekeeper will yell, sin. You're off the mark. That's all the word means. So if I put an energy into my tissue structure that's off the mark, I'm going to bring in an energy that's going to begin the deterioration of the tissue that energy is stored in. And what I want to be about is forgiving my sins, not the misinterpretation of I'm going to be forgiven for my sins. No, it is an active process of removing those energetic patterns that you put into your own tissue structure that are off the mark. So when an energy that's off the mark comes into your structure, it reflects the symptoms. You get a warning sign. When the neuropeptide that comes with the thought disorder hits a cell and is integrated into a cell, that cell yells out with feedback. We call them emotions that warn us of the quality of our creative process. Now, if you live a suppressive lifestyle, hostility, fear, rage, guilt, grief, drama, trauma, drugs, alcohol, junk food, food grown on dirt, like the regular grocery store stuff, then those energetic patterns are shut down in you. When you start to step into willingness and you go, oh, I've got some things I need to work through, I've got some things to embrace, then those energies that have been locked into the structure now start to release. On the way out, while they've been hidden from us while they're within, on the way out, they're going to reproduce the same symptoms as happened when they were on the way in. So the symptoms of healing are identical to the symptoms of disease. The only difference is what direction is the energy going. And as you step into deeper and deeper levels of willingness, as you step into higher and higher levels of empowerment, as you throw the drugs away, as you eat real food, as you become more vital, then you'll be able to go into deeper and deeper levels of what we call a healing crisis. And on a healing, I'm willing to go through the physical, mental, emotional symptoms of healing. So on a physical level, healing looks like any kind of physical symptom you've ever had and low energy. On a mental level, it looks like any kind of negative thought you've ever had and confusion. On an emotional level, it looks like any kind of negative feeling that you've ever had and depression. And so as you go through those layers, the healing process, and this is one of the reasons why it's generally speaking not very popular, is because it's not Dr. Feelgood. I had a gentleman who wrote me an email, or pardon me, a text back just a week or so ago, and this is a man who is in the healing professions, and he started to do the codependence to interdependence intensive about, I don't know, I guess it's close to a year ago now. And it's a self-study, and when he took his personal code evaluation, his post-personal code evaluation, his scores on a scale of 1 to 100 increased like 50, 60 points, just monumental increases. And he's continued to do the work since then. And I'm just going to read you the text that he sent me of what his healing crisis looked like. So he says, "Hi, Michael. I've never experienced," and you know, you can only go to this level of being able to grab out those energies, scoop them out at this deeper level when you've developed the skill and the ability to do it. So I've never experienced such an extreme healing crisis. I can see now how people can die. I've been through a bunch. This was heart and lung crushing, such as deep, deep sorrow and sadness under extreme anger and hate. This went back so far into my father's life, who was born in Germany post-World War II, whose mom was an ex-Nazi nurse and prostitute, which my dad, at 2 years old, wandered around and drank out of mud puddles on the streets by himself, and started to drink at age 4 when he was old enough to crawl up on a bar stool, and then put in an orphanage to be sexually abused. I went back so far. This was a whopper. I'm still in it, but on the other end. I had such an issue with him because of his abuse, and watching my older brother, when I was younger, have a schizophrenic break in front of me due to the abuse he had never recovered. I don't want to dwell on the story, but I felt my dad's power persons and have total empathy and compassion for him now, more than I ever thought I could have. I felt I was initiated into something very big. And so if you really step in to the next depth, build the brain cells for the skills and the tools and do the work, then you move, the ancient teachings talked about going from strength to strength. As you hit new levels of vitality, you'll get new opportunities to sort of scoop out those old energetic patterns, literally from your genes, and free yourself from them. And that's the whole objective of this work, to make space in your physiology for the higher faculties, the higher sensibilities to show up in the world, and to remove those energetic patterns that block the way. In the Course in Miracles, the forgiveness process, they talk about leaving, as a result of the forgiveness process, you leave, quote, a clean and open space within your mind. And when you do, when there's nothing based in generational pain and trauma within your carbon-based memory to jump in and fill that space, then the active presence of your true human life starts to seep into your physiology. Your experience of your own physiology, of your presence in the world, totally and completely transforms from there. that's my input on that. Jeanie, do you have any other thoughts for her?
No, that's excellent. And I'll send her an email and tell her we addressed that at the beginning of the second hour.
Cool. And or she might be on the phone right now, and if so, put a hand up and share if that fleshes out all the corners of the answers you were looking for, or if there's anything else we can do to serve you in that regard. And if not, then before we move back to the article from Dr. Sapolsky, do we have anybody else in the phone queue with a hand up or anything in the chat room, or do you have any other thoughts to add to where we're heading today?
No, there are no hands up, no comments in the chat room, so I would say continue on with Sapolsky's thing on not having free will.
Right. Well, one of the conversations that Jeanie and I had last night was that we were both enjoying how doing the show in this way, taking an article like this and going through it from the perspective of the work, opens many more questions than usually show up on the show, and different questions that usually show up. And of course, you've heard me say many, many times over the years that the most important part of the show is the questions, because when the presence of the right frequency of question is there, then the answer has to spontaneously come if we're not stuck in carbon-based memory. And so thinking that and the next thought was that perhaps we'd put out to you, if there are articles, things that you're working with other than this, things in this arena that you'd like some clarification on, you'd like some support with, you'd like deeper understanding, or just our perspective from the point of view of this work, as we're doing with this article from Dr. Sapolsky, then it would be cool to submit things to us. And I'm thinking in terms of maybe shifting the energy of the show in that direction. We'd cover a broader perspective on this work and be able to bring the perspective of this work into many other arenas of thought. And so it's kind of one of the things we're thinking about at this point. So if you have a thought in that direction, push one, let's talk about it. Otherwise, we're going to go back to that article. And again, this is a Stanford-trained biologist named Robert Sapolsky, and he's written a book around the idea that, or his conclusion after working with baboons for several decades, is that we as human beings have no free will. And so I'm going to begin, if you want to catch up with where we're at, we talked about this on Friday, we talked about it yesterday, or pardon me, Monday and Tuesday. Jeanie has set up a page, why again, /free will, so on our website, and so we'll put all of these shows on that page and some of our other stress-related resources. So we've also got a page on stress that Jeanie's put in there, which has the video from Dr. Sapolsky and his work with baboons, and what he showed with that's pretty powerful. I love what he does. So we're about the middle of the article. Robert Sapolsky understands that saying that people have no free will is a great way to start an argument. This is partly why he put off writing his book for years. For fellow adherents of determinism, the belief that it's impossible for a person in any situation to have acted differently than they did, Sapolsky's scientific defense of cause is welcome. Quote, "Who are we and what we do is ultimately the result of factors beyond our control. And because of this is his thesis, we are never morally responsible for our actions in the sense that would make us truly deserving of praise or blame, punishment and reward." Pardon me, that's my error. That I was thinking that was Sapolsky's quote, but this is an author who agrees with him, a philosopher named Greg Caruso. And he read early drafts of his book, and he goes on to say, "I'm in agreement with Sapolsky that life without belief in free will is not only possible but preferable. And then it's interesting, they give a little bit of the history of this gentleman who just made that statement, Caruso. He's the co-director of the Justice Without Retribution Network. Now, remember, one of the objectives of this work is to support people recognizing that, one, we live in a world of energy. Let's listen to Einstein. On such things as matter, we've been all wrong. What we have heretofore called matter is energy. Energy whose vibrations have been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses, there is no matter. So we're not in a material world. We're in an energetic world. And living in an energetic world, whatever energetic patterns we focus on, we tend to strengthen and create out of. You've heard me say it oftentimes that probably one of the greatest atrocities done to us as human beings down through the ages is that we've had hidden from us the fact that we are by nature creators. As long as we're in the state that Sapolsky is describing here, we are unconscious creators. He's right. All of those influences, all those dynamics end up becoming what we create our lives out of. But when we choose to become conscious and we choose to remove inclinations from the carbon-based memory, from this body-mind unit, then we're freed of the influences that he's talking about that are theoretically running us. My offering is, for most people, it's true. They're just automatons functioning out of whatever energetic dynamics happening to be pushing them around. And they have little or no ability to actually choose between energetic patterns. Whichever is strongest tends to rule the roost. That's why with the forgiveness process, you'll confront and deal with certain issues over and over and over and over again, because each time you do confront one of those issues and you apply forgiveness, you'll weaken its energetic influence a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, and a little bit until you're freed of it. And that's where choice lies. When one of these energetic patterns comes up that runs me, if I fall into it and just play it out, I'm doing exactly what Sapolsky says. There's no free will in that. But if it comes up, I don't have a choice about whether it comes up. That's true. But where my free will lies is when it comes up, I have the ability, if I have the tools and the awareness, to change it. Now, it might take many, many worksheets to go through any one particular emotional trauma in my genetic history. Sometimes you end up forgiving 10 times a minute when the energy starts to move and the healing crisis is on. And one of the things that we'll point out in moving in the direction of realizing and living your life as a creator is that you've got to be able to watch what energies you engage in. And one of the ways to observe the energetic patterns that you're locked into and can forgive and therefore get free of is by watching your words. So this gentleman is a co-director of a group called Justice Without Retribution. Now, knowing that you're a creator and focusing is a creative act, whatever energetic patterns you're focused in, you're going to produce in the world. Let's say that somebody stands out on the street corner, somebody who just has had all kinds of trauma in relationship, and they stand out on the street corner with a bullhorn, and they tell you what it is, as this title of this organization is, what they don't want. So right on Times Square, millions of people passing by, and this person is looking for a mate, a partner that will treat them lovingly, gently, and with respect. And they get out with their bullhorn and with their louded voice, they say, "Now look, world, I don't want anybody that's going to ever beat up on me again. Nobody's ever going to rip me off. Nobody's ever going to rage at me. I don't want anybody that's ever going to try to control me. Don't you ever hit me again. I don't ever want..." Now, how many people do you suppose with that language that person's going to attract that are going to treat them lovingly, gently, and respectfully the way they want to be treated? Zero. Chances are zero, because we live in a world of resonance. That kind of request, whether it's done only silently in the mind, because by definition, remember we're in an energetic world, by definition, the firing of a brain cell is a movement of energy. Every movement of energy creates an energy wave, including the energies in the mind. They're measurable. You can take pictures of them. We're not going to get into that story right now, but that's another topic. So if I'm telling the world about all the things that I don't ever want to have happen to me, who do you suppose is going to show up? Who do you suppose is going to be pulled in by that conversation? Somebody's going to be twisting their mustache, rubbing their hands together, and just so anticipating how they can bring their abuse. So listen to this gentleman. Now, my offering is he's really looking for something wonderful in the world, but now we have justice without retribution. Excuse me, my phone just dropped out the folder. So, first of all, my offering is most people, when they talk about justice, really are not talking about justice at all. They're really talking about getting even. We hear yes, that family wants justice. What do they want? I want that person to pay and go to jail and be punished for what they did. So we're not looking for justice in that sense. What we're looking for is a world of love, gentleness, and respect between people. And then, so first vibration that goes out with the focal point, justice, I'd offer, will tend to create or attract or resonate that mindset of injustice, and then without retribution. Now, if I say don't think about the color of your car, what fires in your brain cells? The color of your car. Nothing else fires. That's what fires. And people say, well, I'm not thinking about the color of my car. So, well, in order to think about it, notice, or not think about it, notice you had to think about it. It's resonance. The mind simply resonates. And whatever is in regulatory speech, in this case in particular retribution, this is a mind that's working against itself. If this person wants to go out and create a world where those who commit crimes are acknowledged as people living in trauma and need to be put in warm, loving, gentle, caring environments for healing, what do you suppose the name of that organization would be? Might it be something like healing and care in the presence of love for those who've fallen away from human behavior? Now we've got language that's going to take us to human behavior, healing, and caring. So what are the inclinations in the mind? And oftentimes what happens is, out of the inclinations in the mind of what we want to create, because we haven't resolved in ourselves the issues around that, we end up with things like justice without retribution. So he goes on to say, so he's the director of this organization, and he says these energetic influences, the offering is that these energetic influences from carbon-based memory that have us working against ourselves advocates, in this case, an approach to criminal activity that prioritizes future harm rather than assigning blame or antisocial behavior, for violent or antisocial behavior. So, great idea. Let's stop assigning blame, but if the focus is blame, what do you suppose is going to be the underlying dynamic of the creative process? Oh, so how about if we create an organization, instead of going by these influences from the past that take away our power of choice, if we wake up to the place where we have choice, it's when these energetic influences come to conscious awareness that we can change them. We don't have a choice about what's in there. It's there. We don't have a choice about what fires unless we're conscious and we initiate something firing purposely, consciously. And so, and this gentleman is looking at prioritizing preventing future harm. What's the focus as a creator but creating future harm? Rather than assigning blame, what's the focus? Creating more blame. So what do we want to do? We want to gently and with respect, bring people who are living in guilt and fear and blame into a space where they understand that blame, self-blame, or attracting blame from others can be healed. And do we want to prevent future harm, or do we want to create a future where active present love is the governing energy in everyone's life? Like human life is prevalent in all of the world. And each person, of course, with their free will, choosing to do with their human lives whatever it is that it is their purpose to do. So then this gentleman goes on to tell about his organization. So focusing on the causes of antisocial behavior, violent and antisocial behavior. This is what this organization does. They missed the note from Yeshua 2,000 years ago when he said, "Let thine eye be single and thy body will be filled with light." Now, you think about that thought from our standard meaning of words, and you go, what the heck does that mean? Your eye's single? I've only got one eye, and my body's filled with light? What? Let's go to the Aramaic on that one. What Yeshua is doing there is he's telling us how creation works. And I there is perception, the constructs of your mind. Let those constructs be focused in one frequency, and then your body will be filled with light. If you talk to the physicists today, they'll tell you that matter is light energy solidified. So what he's saying there is what you focus on, you literally bring about in form. If you focus on the causes of violent and antisocial behavior, what have you intensified in the world? Forget about focusing on the causes of violent and antisocial behavior. Start to work into what's the healing of violent and antisocial behavior. Forget the study of disease. You know, very early in my career when I decided to head in the direction of naturopathic medicine, and I looked at, pharmaceutical medicine. And the whole focus was on disease. And, the study is disease. And in fact, there's a thing they call the second-year syndrome that they've recognized across the board, whether it's schools of psychology or schools of medicine, is that when you're studying what is aberrant, you end up suffering from the symptoms of what you're studying. So by the second year of studying, that second-year syndrome says whatever you've been studying, the diseases, tend to become manifest in your life, tend to become expressed in your form. Why? Because we're creators, and the world is energy, and the form tends to move in the energy that one is directed in. Oh, let thine eye be single. So what you'll find is a study of health and healing, the cause of health, is far more profitable than the study of disease. And so rather than the causes of violent and antisocial behavior, let's look for the tools with which to heal the minds of those who are stuck in violent or antisocial behavior. And then to get rid of this idea of punishment. We live on the punishment planet. Virtually everybody thinks, you hear about the person, let's say, who's abused a child. What do most people want to do to the child abuser? Abuse them. Well, when you realize you live in an energetic world, if the influence of abuse comes in and you are abhorred by it, it is an absolutely abhorrent thing to you, and you want to abuse, why is it you abhor that energy? Because it's in you. It's your opportunity to heal that energy in you and free yourself from it. So, and then he completes with powerful statement, allow us to adopt more humane and effective practices and policies. Now, the whole objective of this work, that piece of his descriptor, this gentleman that Caruso, who's a determinist, and read Sapolsky's book in advance for him, I'm in full agreement with that final piece. It's like, let's move into functioning as human beings. That's the work we're doing here. And in my experience, and I'm open to be corrected, but I've been looking, studying, working in every arena I could from one end of the world to the other. Been to China and looked at their healing practices, been to Tibet, looked at their healing practices, been to Greece, to look into the philosophies and what happens there. Been all over the world. And my offering is, there's only one consistent, persistent way to change these influences that Sapolsky is talking about so that you actually capture or bring to life your ability to have choice and therefore free will. So there are all of these influences that each time they're enforced, each time they're focused on, become strengthened. If you bring forgiveness into the situation, then when one of these untoward energies surfaces in the mind, because you understand that it is a goal that's driving it to move in you, and you collapse that goal in the presence of love, then the ability to embrace that untoward influence, that inclination in active present love, each time you do it, weakens the impetus of that energy within you until it's gone. There's just no inclination toward it. It's just gone. We see that, right down to what happens in physiology. We see that with alcoholics. Over the years, I've had many, many people who are addicted to alcohol through this work. And it doesn't even have to be a desire to quit drinking. What I've noticed is people who do this work just spontaneously move away from things like alcohol. And my offering is because most people are, quote-unquote, driven to drink. And I don't care if it's even just a casual drink that you say, oh, I just enjoy it. This is a central nervous system suppressor. It is a disease in a bottle. No questions about it. It is a central nervous system suppressor, shuts down the central nervous system, and has all kinds of untoward effects that are just horrendous, even at minimal amounts of use. Of course, the profession that is making money off of that has quote-unquote research that says, 2 or 3 drinks a day is good for you. Yeah, well, it's good for the bottom line of the alcohol companies, but I'll put forward the question. If you want your components of vitamin C that is in your red wine, go get yourself some resveratrol. Forget the red wine because the alcohol is not worth it. So what I've noticed is that as people forgive, they drop away the addictive habits and they turn toward things that are vitalizing. And my offering is the reason for that is because when someone is quote-unquote driven to drink, they're driven to drink. They want their central nervous system suppressed, shut down, because there's something in them that they don't want to feel and they don't want to deal with. There's some form of pain. When they use forgiveness to resolve that pain, then there's nothing they want to hide from themselves anymore. They want a fully functioning central nervous system and brain. And the influence of things like alcohol just disappear. And so my offering is that the only thing that I have found that consistently, persistently moves people toward that goal, and it is an ongoing lifetime of work, is actively engaging in the process of forgiveness. And so I'm going to take an intermission and take a breath here and just see if we've got anybody out there in the phone queue with a hand up, Jeanie. If any of this has aroused anything for you, thoughts, questions, answers, refinements, experiences to share, then please push 1. Let's have a conversation. If you're on one of those stations where we can't see you in our control panel, if you would just dial the call-in number for the show, which is 563-999-3581. We'll be able to see you on our control panel, and then if you push 1, it raises a hand, and Jeanie will introduce you by your area code. If you want to remain private, if I ask you who you are, you don't have to give me your accurate name. You're welcome to remain private. So, Ms. Jeanie, do we have anybody out there in the phone queue with a hand up or anything happening in the chat room?
Nope, it is all quiet on this end.
Okay, great. Well, then now we come to the critique phase in the article about Sapolsky. There's a gentleman named Peter C. T-S-E, I assume that's probably how you pronounce it, who's a neuroscientist. And he wrote a book in 2013 that quite contradicts Sapolsky, because his book is The Neural Basis of Free Will. So C says Sapolsky is, quote, a wonderful explainer of complex phenomenon. However, a person can be both brilliant and utterly wrong. So he just puts it out there. This is an error. And then he goes on to explain, or the writer of the article goes on to explain what this Dartmouth professor has to say, a neuroscientist. He said, neuroactivity is highly variable, with identical inputs often resulting in non-identical responses in individuals and populations. It is more accurate to think of those inputs as imposing parameters rather than determining specific outcomes. Even if the range of potential outcomes is limited, there's simply too much variability at play to think of our behavior as predetermined. So he's saying something comes along and resonates information in you, and that in every individual, because there's different information in us, then we have different information or different understandings, and of course make different choices or different decisions. The mind comes up with its own decision, remembering that carbon-based memory is a resonance machine and will always produce or present whatever resonates the strongest in it. Actually, it just occurs to me, I'd read yesterday, I think it was yesterday, I'm going to shift out of here for a minute, and let me just look for an article. I mentioned the CIA and its research, and I have a big disagreement with one piece of the CIA, because they're limited as well in how they're seeing this thing. If you remember, I read, this is a quote from the CIA, who were talking about how perception is a construct of the mind. People tend to think of perception as a passive process. We see, hear, smell, taste, and feel stimuli that impinge upon our senses. We think that if we are at all objective, we record what is actually there. Yet perception is demonstrably an active rather than passive process. It constructs, perception constructs rather than records reality. So your reality is a construct in your mind. You live in a world of actuality quite different from the constructs of your mind, which trick you into thinking that the construct your mind is presenting is actually outside of you and you're seeing something out there. That's always a lie. We can get to corrected perception, at which point the information that's served through the perceptual mind is accurate and in accord with what's going on in the actuality, but it still won't be the actuality. So again, the CIA is saying it constructs rather than records reality. They go on to say, quote, perception implies understanding as well as awareness. It is a process of inference in which people construct their own version of reality. I'm 100% with them. That whole statement is just right there. And then their whole thesis just falls apart. And whenever I've read this quote, and I've read it dozens of times, I've never gotten into that because it wasn't particularly relevant to the conversation. But here, what we're talking about really opens this last line of their quote up. And, it's always been there, but it's something that's never in the show been appropriate or I felt inclined to address this issue. But again, I'm going to read this whole last sentence. Perception implies understanding as well as awareness. It is a process of inference in which people construct their own version of reality on the basis of information, and then what they say is provided through the five senses. Now, they're kind of in line there with Sapolsky. Okay? Stimulus, whatever the response is, there it is. And They're saying that this thing that they're calling reality, our own version of reality, is constructed on the basis of information provided through the five senses. That's totally and completely in error. No, it's not. The reality our mind constructs is a result of, yes, information coming in through the five senses, but what does that resonate in the individual? So the reality the mind constructs is not, as they're saying in the last sentence of this quote from them, is not constructed based on the five senses. It's based on what the information that comes in through the five senses resonates in the way of content in the mind, the inclinations that are there. So it's a small point, but a rather important point to really capture and understand. And I just open once again to see if that tweaks anything for anybody. Anybody have a thought, question, answer, idea to put into the equation at this point?
There are no hands up.
Okay. So the gentleman from Dartmouth, his book Behave, The Biology of Humans at Their Best and Worst. Excuse me, I jumped.
The Dartmouth is the neural basis of free will.
Right. Yeah. My screen just jumped on me. Give me just a second here. Excuse me. It's going to take me a second here to get my screen back in line here. So this professor from Dartmouth, his book breaks down the neurochemical influences that contribute to human behaviors, analyzing the milliseconds to centuries preceding, saying that the pulling of a trigger or the suggestive touch of an arm is coming from these inclinations in the mind. And the book we're talking about of Robert Sapolsky, by the way, is entitled Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will. If you are inclined to read it, it is an interesting perspective on life. And we're looking to put his thoughts in the context of this work, and wherever there are things that don't agree, just point them out, and then it would be interesting to have a conversation with Robert on this topic. It'd be kind of fun to do. He's done some really awesome stuff. So, in his book, Sapolsky goes a step further. The article goes on to say, if it's impossible for any single neuron or any single brain to act without influence from factors beyond its control, Sapolsky argues, there can be no logical room for free will. Now, for me, that would be like, so I sit at my computer, and if my input to the computer calls up certain information, I can't do something different than that information? Here's where, to me, the free will argument falls apart, or the lack of free will. If I'm sitting at my computer, yeah, there's no choice about what comes up when I type certain keys, when I hit certain keys. But what I do with it What I do with the end result of that, yes, there are 1,000 influences. Yes, there are inputs from, as he said in that earlier section, maybe somebody had a close call, an accident, and their adrenaline's up. Somebody else is, quote unquote, in love, and the hormones are running. All of those influences, and that's all what's going to bring perception into play. Now, what we're saying here is, to really function as a whole human being with choice, you got to be out of your mind. Remember how often we've talked about become the thinker apart from the thought, the feeler apart from the feelings, the actor apart from the actions. So I step back and I observe my mind in operation, just like I look at my computer screen, and my computer screen says, because there's a corrupt program in it, 2 and 2 is 5. Well, okay, there's no choice about what the computer's going to do. That's what's in it. But now that it's on the screen, I can say, ooh, there's an error, and I can go in and fix that. That's exactly what forgiveness does. So I would agree with him if we're just talking about, again, carbon-based memory. And what he says would be true if the only action possible is from the brain, is from the multi-generational database reflected in constructs in the mind. But at this point, he's only talking about inclinations. Now, again, and I think I talked about this yesterday, the only creature we know at this point that can do anything other than unfold what's firing within them is the human being. We are capable of a new, contemplated, planned behavior rather than just bouncing off of what's in carbon-based memory. So the author of the article goes on to say, a big question mark, but like with everything, we have no meaningful command over our choice of careers, romantic partners, weekend plans? And Sapolsky says no. And when we wake up to who we are, we realize that we have the ability to do something other than be subject to what's firing in brain cells. We do have the ability to originate, to put things into the system that we would think of as this body-mind unit, and then direct it in a different direction than what carbon-based memory would allow. So change is possible, and he talks about how, remember the sea slug example that he used, is that the change comes from an external stimuli. My offering is that because we as human beings, in our created essence as love, have the ability to originate new information, then we can change the output of the whole system. And yesterday we talked about the higher faculties. Excuse me, somebody just dialed into my phone here, interrupted the flow. So the Dartmouth professor, who conflicts with what Sapolsky is saying, is those who push the idea that we are nothing but deterministic biochemical puppets are responsible for enhancing psychological suffering and hopelessness in this world. Even those who believe biology limits our choices are wary of how openly we should embrace that. Saul Smilansky, a philosopher from the University of Haifa in Israel, is the author of a book called Free Will and Illusion. And he rejects the idea that we can will ourselves to transcend all genetic and environmental constraints. But if we want to live in a just society, We have to believe that we can. So he's saying you just hold this fantasy and then it improves things. And my offering there is that this is another misunderstood take on the fact that, yes, there are all kinds of genetic and environmental influences and constraints. And if we're awake, I talked about, the original story, that this metaphor, this whole scriptural journey is simply a metaphor for how a human life unfolds and some of the skills that need to be acquired. We hear this story about Adam being created, and then shortly after that, it says he fell into a deep sleep. So carbon-based memory, Adam, Adamos, means the red clay. Yes, if that's all that you think you are, then yeah, you're asleep in Adam. All the influences there will run your life. This gentleman from University of Haifa is saying that free will is an illusion, but it's useful. He goes on to say, losing all belief in free and moral responsibility would be catastrophic. Encouraging people to do so is dangerous and even irresponsible. And then some research on this whole idea is quoted by the author. A widely cited 2008 study found that people who read passages dismissing the idea of free will were more likely to cheat on subsequent tests. Other studies found that people who feel less control over their actions care less about making mistakes in their work, and that belief in free will leads to more aggression and less helpfulness. So there's a big conversation about it going on in the world, and Sapolsky discusses those concerns in his book, ultimately concluding that the effects seen in such experiments are too small and their lack of reproducibility too great to support the idea that civilization will crumble if we think we can't control our fates. The more compelling critique, Sapolsky says, is eloquently articulated in the short story, What is Expected of Us, a speculative fiction writer called Ted Chiang. The narrator describes a new technology that convinces users that choices are predetermined, and it becomes a discovery that zaps them of their will to live. It's essential that you believe and behave as if your decisions matter, the narrator warns, even though you know they don't. The great risk of abandoning free will, Sapolsky conceives, isn't that we will want to do bad things. It's that without a personal sense of agency, we'll feel like we don't want to do anything. Goes on to say, it may be dangerous to tell people that they don't have free will, he says. The vast majority of the time, I really think it's a hell of a lot more humane to teach people that don't have free will. Sapolsky knows he won't persuade most of his readers. It's hard to convince people who've been harmed that the perpetrators deserve less blame because of their history of poverty. It's even harder to convince the well-off that their accomplishments deserve less praise because of their history of privilege. And he goes on to say, and it's kind of humorous, he says, if you have time to be bummed out by all of this, you're one of the lucky ones. In other words, you're living a life of privilege as your life is unfolding. His true hope, he says, is to increase compassion. Maybe if people understand how thoroughly an early history of trauma can rewire a brain, they can stop lusting for harsh punishments. Yeah, again, we live in the punishment plan, and it's time to be finished with punishment. Nobody deserves punishment. If that, and I don't know directly, but if that's Sapolsky's objective here for justice, or pardon me, for a more compassionate society, I'm in agreement with him. I think that punishment should be eradicated from planet Earth totally and completely. Now, does that mean someone who's engaged in criminal activity shouldn't be put in a jail cell? No, not in the least. You know, we have systems for protecting society, and the jail cell is one of them. But it's just a the way the society creates a job for the violent in many cases. Now, I've known some wonderful jail guards. I've been in a lot of jails over the years, a lot of prisons around the country teaching. And there's been some awesome people who've stepped up to the plate and really taken this work to people who really need it. I mean, I've seen murderers turn around. I've seen some pretty amazing things. And we don't have to get rid of free will to create a more compassionate society. Actually, one of the other results of forgiveness is that when we forgive, when we remove the energetic dynamics of hate and fear, hostility, vengeance, the desire for punishment of others, the inflow of human essence, aside from being, the actual state of being is love. An aspect of that state of being as love is compassion. It automatically becomes part of it. So maybe, Sapolsky says, if someone realizes they have a brain condition like depression or ADD, they'll stop hating themselves and for struggling with tasks that seem to be easy for others. Just as previous generations thought Caesars were brought on by witchcraft, some of our current beliefs about personal responsibility may eventually be undone by scientific discovery. Now, my take is what Sapolsky's really saying is here is we need to get rid of this whole game of blame. We need to get out of the one world universal religion of finding somebody to blame for what's going on in us, take responsibility for the inclinations within ourselves toward any form of violence, and learn to forgive those things. He says we're machines, exceptional in our ability to perceive our own experiences and feel emotions about them. It's pointless to hate a machine for its failures. There's only one last thread, they says, they can't resolve. It is logically indefensible, ludicrous, meaningless to believe that something good can happen to a machine. He writes, nonetheless, I'm certain that it is good if people feel less pain and more happiness. My offering would be, rather than taking away free will, the solution lies in, here's a tool called forgiveness. Get rid of those energetic inclinations within you that cause you pain and suffering. There's your free will. You can choose to do that. Now, sadly, because those inclinations in many people are so strong, after they do their first worksheet and they start looking at what's in there and what they need to deal with, they turn tail and run away. And that, unfortunately, is sometimes just part of the process. So that's our completion, and unless we have maybe questions that come up tomorrow, that's the completion of covering this article from Robert Sapolsky, a professor of biology at Stanford University. If you have an article that you'd like us to review in the context of this work, as we've done here, drop Jeanie a note, JEANIE @whyagain.org. Appreciate you being with us.